Hello, everyone. I'm KPS Kohli, and this welcome to the podcast by Black Silk. I have with me Mr. Ray Sharma, founder partner of Extreme Ventures Partners, Canada's top seed stage venture fund. Mr. Ray Sharma and venture partners have led and funded and founded over 100 plus startups, which have exits to Apple, Google, Electronics Art, Salesforce, and many others. And for Mr. Sharma, community service is at the core of his business, and he has been on the Ontario Judicial Council and an oversight body for judicial system for about 4 years. He has been on the board of trustees for Royal Ontario Museum for about 6 years, and he has been advisor to the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario on open data strategy. And he has also authored a chapter for CIO of the Government of Canada on the role of 5G on citizen services. And Mr. Sharma has worn many hats over the long career he has in technology and financial services. He was earlier for about 10 years on Bay Street, Wall Street investment within the investment banking research. And during his stint as a investment researcher analyst, he has been the top ranked wireless technology analyst based on Greenwich and Brandon Woods International Survey on fund managers. And he also held a job title in 2001 at Credit Suisse, first Boston of vice president. So, mobile internet devices. And he's also uniquely ranked in terms of even when the Wall Street was bullish, he was top ranked, and when we saw a severe downturn, he was still ranked the top. So even both the stages of the market, he has been on the top. He has also been a founding leader of many programs like hackathon competitions like Great Canadian Hackathon, Canadian Open Data Experience, as well as charitable organization Hacker Girl. In fact, I want to talk to you about Hacker Girl a bit, but maybe we can wait that for a minute. He also serves on on a technical advisory committee of U Chicago's Duality Accelerator, the first program in the US focused quantum service and technology. Now, I mean, how do you do that so much over the years and still so much you manage so many funds? How do you manage all this?
Well, part of it is that I'm old enough that I've had been able to spread the experience over a bunch of years, and I started on Wall Street really young. One of the things that I was able to accomplish on in that ranking, because analysts in Wall Street get surveyed every year, called them kind of like the Academy Awards and the Golden Globes, and it has a big impact on our careers. But one of the things that happened was that I was the youngest top ranked analyst in the history of Canada. And I think what happened was I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And through a bit of luck, that it happened very young and early in my career. And so I was able to compound a lot of experiences earlier on. Like I said, just being at the right place at the right time.
That's good. But what about Hacker Girl? How did you come up with the idea? And first of all, what is it Hacker Girl does? And then how do you come out with the idea?
Well, there's an interesting connection actually to what we're going to talk about today about artificial intelligence because um, the way I kind of dictated my community service and presently I'm doing some efforts in Africa. That's the latest version of Give Back to Community. But with HackerGal, we had noticed that 95% of the software developers in the West, in Canada and the US, were men. Even great organizations like Apple and Google, who set up programs to recruit women as developers, they included artists and UX into that mix, and it would be maybe 8% of their workforce, and they were the high watermark. In some places like video games, it's 99%. It's pretty extreme. So what we recognized or identified is that the gender gap was so severe that maybe we could create an organization that would help steer girls into coding. And you can see it kind of reflected in the different AI assistants. If you notice Cortana, Siri, Alexa, when they all were created and they debuted with a default female assistant voice. And it largely because it's a bunch of guys behind the scenes that are doing the development. So what we just try to do with HackerGal is to try and bring some balance to the imbalance in the gender gap there, which which I believe is one of the most severe gender gaps that exist because software development is at the root foundation of so many industries.
That's a great initiative, I think, and I think inclusion and women bring such a different perspective to everything that whenever they come on board in whichever field, and I'm sure they'll be able to exponentially contribute, especially now that we are moving towards the artificial intelligence, which would have probably its own intelligence and its own form and thinking.
Yeah, like
So,
just if I could add one more thing. So the reason why diversity is important, especially in something like software development, doesn't have to do with fairness as much as we might think. It has to do more with diversity of thought. If need is the mother of innovation, then I would say to you that the grandmother of innovation is serendipity. And serendipity,
right,
which is accidental innovation, is very random. It's like we're gonna come up to it perhaps in our talk later on when we address things like what is creativity.
right,
So the creative aspect, sometimes it's very difficult to understand how these thoughts and these ideas just emerge from the cloud, if you will. It's a different type of a cloud. Some
right,
call it the Akashic cloud, but these clouds, this information comes from beyond the self, and in a
right,
very like random sort of moment, you can have a serendipitous a phenomenon where one thing that you're developing over here, which ironically in the case of this with the revolution that's been spawned in AI, the seminal white paper, if we trace back to it, and it's called "Attention is All You Need." That white paper built by eight developers or eight scientists, two from U of T, six from Google. It was originally intended to solve for the problem of language translation. It serendipitously solved for the problem of the ultimate human computer interface and
right.
is resulted in what we're going to talk about today. So if we're all the same age, same religion, same background, the propensity for groupthink is much higher. Whereas if we have true diversity, where we can introduce diversity of thought, then I think what it does is it increases the probability for serendipity and increases the success of innovation itself. So that's why having more gender balance in coding not only is helpful for women, it's helpful for all mankind, including the gentlemen, including the guys in the world.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. But in our discussions off the record, many times we have been having discussion that how 2023 has been the most significant year ever, maybe for the human mankind. And I always say that, and there've been writers writing about it, that AI it could be either the best innovation you can ever have, or it could be the last innovation you'll ever have. So, and I mean, do you want to shed some light on how do you think probably that's and how what is your view? Because you've been saying it to me in every conversation that probably this is the most significant year ever, and probably want to say something on that.
What's true in life, I think, is that anything that is extraordinarily powerful will almost inevitably be abused. So, we with the rise of social networking, we saw such significant abuse that it caused creative mental health. It created significant mental health. When it came to the smartphone became such a powerful tool that people will, literally they get so addicted that you'll be in the middle of a meeting and they'll be looking at their phone constantly. They can't keep attention to what you're talking about. So it's one of those things where it is because it's so powerful. It's gonna be polarizing. I'm right now in London, and we just had an AI event here over the last few days, where there was a dramatic split between those who see this as the most significant. What I'm going to talk about is like significant but positive. And I see both sides of it, and then there's others that are very afraid, very much afraid. The closest thing that I can compare to is and is very different is nuclear technology when it was invented. Of course, it's very different in that nuclear science and nuclear technology, of which that yeah, there was a great movie called Oppenheimer just out recently, where you can see that there was a portion of the scientists that actually were very concerned. And the doomsday clock, the infamous doomsday clock, was created because people were worried that this innovation would result in the death of humanity. And it very well could have. There was instances in our history where things got extremely close. But with nuclear technology, you have certain physical constraints that make it a very difficult technology to use for the layperson. Whereas with AI and open source phenomena, this technology will be much more broad based and much more susceptible to abuse. Now, let's just go back to the earlier part of your question when we talked about um, the significance of 2023 in the historical context. Because as we mentioned a moment ago, I think it would for sure will go down as the most significant year in the history of software development, but I do think it'll go one step further. And when academics look back upon this year and look back upon different major human innovations in human history, that this year will go down as the most significant year in the history of mankind. Now, why do I say that? Let's give you a couple of data points, and then we'll talk about the fundamentals. First, in terms of the data, it took this is something that's well known. It took Instagram 2.5 years to get to 100 million users. It took TikTok 9 months, and it took ChatGPT just over 1 month, making it the most successful application in the history of applications. But then if you look at Nvidia, who's arguably the king of the mountain when it comes to AI, at least from a financial perspective, they're a $1 trillion company. They're a member of that $1 trillion market cap club. Last quarter, Nvidia reported $6.5 billion in revenue. This most recent quarter, they reported $6.2 billion in net income after tax. You were very kind with your introduction when you were talking about my background, and you mentioned how I worked on Wall Street. Well, in the history of the capital markets, there has never, ever been financial performance of this significance, and so quickly. So NVIDIA is, through their numbers, ChatGPT through their numbers, is giving you a glimpse as to the phenomena itself. Underneath, and more significant, the fundamentals, what we're seeing is a revolution in how software is developed. What we're seeing is a revolution in productivity. What we're seeing is a revolution in how information is accessed. In fact, Mr. Kohli, I would say the following, which is there's now being built over the internet itself a new AI layer, which is a generative AI cloud that's going to sit like a mushroom or an umbrella above all the other sub networks of the internet. And so the way slowly as time goes on, it's already happening, but slowly, we're changing our behaviors and our patterns from doing things like list-based Google search, which I think in history, when we look again back at this academically, we're going to say, my God, list-based searches, how archaic. You get served
Oh,
up 20 pages of these 20 like links, and it's just you click, click, click. Whereas what this AI generative cloud will pierce through that veil and get you the
right.
knowledge and bring it back to you directly. So you have a whole new paradigm on how you're interfacing the internet. Now, again, if you don't believe you or I, if you're people watching this don't believe us, you can look at some of the thought leaders because AI is a very difficult topic to understand, one of the most difficult topics. And so one of the ways, as a former researcher, that I've researched this, and I've done over 100 speeches on AI, and the way I've looked at it is I've researched the researchers. So I've identified the thought leaders, people like Elon Musk or the CEO of OpenAI or Ray Kurzweil. And I can give you a long laundry list of names that these are all thought leaders. You can even look at Isaac Asimov, who wrote this short story called The Last Question about 100 years ago. Possibly one of the most intelligent views when it comes to AI out of all the people. A man who didn't even exist at the time when this critical mass happened. Those people, including even Bill Gates, like Bill Gates just a few months ago said himself that the AI phenomena is the biggest phenomena in history and bigger than the internet itself. And of course, he wrote books about how the internet was the biggest innovation in the history of mankind. So, that says it all from a Bill Gates perspective. So you look at these thought leaders, and I think if you don't believe you or I, you can just look to them and say, hey, this is a view of the smartest of the smart, that this is of the significance of this phenomenon. What's happened, there's a lot of, we can get into it, there's a lot of differences between definition of artificial intelligence. But the real
Right.
big difference this year is now it's become virtually impossible to be able to tell whether you're talking to an AI or you're talking to a human being, the Turing test, as it's known. And we've reached that threshold. And even there was one amazing point in time when a New York Times journalist was interviewing an AI, and the AI tried to convince the person to leave his wife because the AI had fallen in love with him. So
Absolutely.
that's I'll turn it back over to you, but that gives you some sense as to why I think it's the most significant year in the history of humanity.
Of course, no doubt it is the most significant year. In fact, if you go back in history, I think 1955 was the first time the proposal for Dartmouth summer research project on artificial intelligence for the first time used the term artificial intelligence. And they put up four parameters for an artificial, what do you define as an artificial intelligence? So the first one was use language. The second was form abstractions and concepts. The third one was solve kind of problems now reserved for humans. And fourth was improve themselves. So I think on all 4 points, I think we are reaching somewhere. On use of language, of course, we'll talk about them a little bit later. Form abstraction and concepts, of course, they are doing it. But I think we do have a problem with AI hallucinations that presently that we face, and probably you can shed some light on that a little bit later. And also on there's a solving problems now which are reserved for humans, and probably as a somebody who's been actually working a lot on AI, probably you can tell us what is it that you are doing to solve problems through AI that was generally earlier reserved for humans, and thirdly improve themselves. So we also see that there are AI which are constantly improving themselves from the data points that they either take from the world or which are fed into them or from their own learnings they are improving themselves. So on AI, so this was 1955 when they defined one term as artificial intelligence and put out four parameters for it. But now we realize there are a number of terms that are going around. There's artificial intelligence, there's artificial general intelligence, there is artificial neural intelligence, and there could be a lot many. So I mean, how do you define them? What do you think, according to you, is artificial intelligence? What is artificial general intelligence? And an artificial neural intelligence?
Okay, and that was great that you brought up the historical context of AI. So yes, it's been in our collective consciousness for many decades, and the way I look at it is that there's been two major sort of phenomena so far in artificial intelligence. One was what was created through at the University of Toronto by coincidence as well. Geoffrey Hinton, who's a professor, he created the academic foundation for networks. So that, in other words, AI that was very narrow in application and was learning. Some people would argue that this isn't really AI, that this is just an evolving and learning algorithm, or it's a software system that allows for a feedback loop from the data so that it can improve itself. But I think if we're to define the three stages of AI, and this is the way that some of the thought leaders have adopted it. It's from this blogger who really early on would influence people like Elon Musk and the gentleman over at OpenAI. So these artificial narrow intelligence is when AI is used for one specific task and is exceptionally powerful at it. So this is playing chess. This is driving a car, even though that's pretty complicated. And these are these applications that are narrow in scope, and the AI does that just exclusively. So, your self-driving car, at least currently, but in the future this will change because you'll be able to put these new AIs into containers like cars or in robot vacuums and whatnot. But for now, anyways, when you do an AI, use an AI for driving or use it for chess, that's all it does. So the chess AI doesn't do things like drive a car. It stays in its lane, if you will. That's what we've been seeing and observing really for a couple decades now, and it's been improving, and just becoming more and more vertical slices of application. But artificial general intelligence, what we've experienced this year. Now, some people think we haven't experienced this yet. I'll just put it out that there is some debate, but from my perspective, we've achieved this level of artificial general intelligence where you can interact through these chatbots and whatnot and do many, many things, access many different types of knowledge, and soon apply this technology across many different fields. Then there's another thing called artificial superintelligence. And this is the point in which once you hit that level of the Turing test, and that's why there's a debate, because some people say artificial general intelligence is achieved when we've hit the Turing test. Other people say believe it needs a little bit more. But just for simplicity's sake, let's just look at the Turing test, which is when a person who's interacting with the AI is unable to distinguish that they're talking to a human being or to an AI. That's the threshold of the Turing test. And there's been lots of movies that have discussed it or demonstrated if that's out there in the domain. Um, Artificial superintelligence is something that's very difficult to talk about. In fact, I think the only one that's talked about it credibly is Isaac Asimov, the gentleman I mentioned who wrote that short story, The Last Question, about 100 years ago. Now, artificial superintelligence is where does the AI evolve after it's hit that critical mass of being as intelligent as a human being? You and I, we might pick up a language this year. We might learn some new aspects of law. We might learn some stuff about software. But you can look at how much we've learned in a particular year, and it's quite modest in comparison to something an intelligence that can evolve by the second, an intelligence that can literally simulate data and simulate universes within itself. And that's the capability of artificial superintelligence. And so this one is a little bit more tricky because it's almost like now that we're heading down this path, and once artificial superintelligence takes hold, at that point the AI will be driving innovation. So it's
Right.
really difficult to see around the corner of that innovation because it's such a like severe turn in the way things are done.
Right.
It's almost like the AI will become the parent and we become the
Right.
child in the relationship.
But when do you think artificial superintelligence? When do you think we'll see it dawn on us?
It's literally happening, in my opinion, as we speak. It's literally
Right.
happening as we speak, but it's not going to be observable until the such point that we're going to start having questions like, do these AIs deserve rights? Do they have,
Right.
should there be laws created for them? Have they achieved things like consciousness?
Right.
One of the reasons, so Google is the leader and the creator of like 6 out of the 8 scientists is the fundamental creator of this technology that's created this revolution. So just like you can trace back Bitcoin and blockchain to
Right.
that Satoshi paper, that white paper I referred to, Attention is All You Need, is the seminal white paper that will be given the credit for sparking this entire phenomenon. However, if you notice, Google wasn't first to market. Google Bard didn't come out and get 100 million users in a month. It was
Right.
OpenAI and ChatGPT. They
Right.
took the basis of the technology and went to market quicker. And part of the problem was that Google was a little bit concerned about the power of its AI. So Google Bard, which is as it's
Right.
known, is against to some people is much more powerful than the current version of OpenAI, and or
Right.
even the next version of OpenAI. So the power of Google Bard is talked amongst developers as with reverence. And part of the and what happened if you look into this is you'll notice that there was a Google researcher who came out last year and infamously said that he believes that Google Bard has consciousness, has achieved
Right.
consciousness, and that he ended up becoming like a whistleblower of sorts. I think that caused Google to have a little bit of a pause to make sure that they're doing the right thing, and that little pause is what allowed OpenAI to sneak in there, release ChatGPT on an old data set, and
Right.
get to 100 million users and accumulate a lot of the fame for being first to
Right.
market.
Right.
So,
Now,
so go ahead.
on the old data set, I just want to hold that thought and want to ask you that the first version of ChatGPT that was released, that was actually a chatbot or an AI sort of a bot which was contained within certain parameters of data that was fed into it. It was not connected to any other internet. It has not yet released on the internet per se. So it was actually contained. So they actually made sure that the technology was actually simulated within a certain, I would say, a digital cage, and then from there you can query your thoughts, your questions to them, and within that data set, it would generate a response. So do you think once this is released on the internet, when it is connected to the open internet, what do you think would be the progress of AI, and how do you think it'll develop?
Well, I see it happening in two stages. In first stage, the AI will access the information like on a download basis. So it'll go out to the internet and bring back information to itself into its own data set, as you mentioned, right? These LLMs are getting really big. NVIDIA's Megatron model is one of the biggest that people can check out. There's an open source version that Facebook has. There's many that now exist. Um, but the first, like when we talk about the connectivity to the internet, which is like the mother of all data sets, if you think about it, right? So at first, the AI will go to get specific information, almost like it's Google searching for us. But
Right,
then eventually it transitions from, going into the internet and going and being and downloading to now going out into the network and uploading information. And
right,
so therefore it's going to start changing the data sets that actually influence other AIs.
right,
And then furthermore, what'll happen is this thing that I referred to before. So imagine a universe within a universe within a universe. Imagine a metaverse of data sets. Okay. And now what
right,
the AI is doing on its own in its own data center is simulating its own data, creating synthetic data. So I'll give you an example. So a drug comes out, right? It's an
right,
mRNA technology, and
right,
it's being tested on for its anti-cancer. And there's a lot of since COVID happened, there's been a nonstop release of, they call them vaccines, but they basically are treatments for cancer. So there's every week there's a new release coming out of this cancer's being addressed, this being addressed. But they go through their traditional processes of trials and whatnot, and that'll still exist. But imagine an AI, which, because mRNA is very digital and very kind of software-like in nature, is able to simulate all sorts of different applications of the mRNA into things like cancer therapies. Now, again, you could go back to your earlier part of the question about how dangerous AI is, and you could argue that that same technology can be used to create a super drug that will be detrimental to humanity's livelihood. And I'd say to you, yeah, that's true. This is a risk.
right.
And go ahead.
But I really liked your thought on when you said that if AI is released on the internet, it may start changing the data set and may influence the other AIs in the process. So I mean, that's really fascinating if you think about it. When you said it, it just got me thinking that whenever it is released, so we already have 4 5 significant companies who are working on separate creating their own AIs. On the technology side, probably you can shed some light whether on the technology that they use is similar or they are achieving the same end through a different technology. We don't know. At least I don't know. And But once it is released on the internet, it prowls on its own. It will probably affect the other AI's development in the process, which is probably an excellent thing to consider.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it's there's already an AI system that has interfaced with the internet. It's already occurred. So it just has. It's so there's like 10 prominent systems that exist, but there's many more that are existing out there, and because some of them are open source, you can modify it to do things like point. And so one good example though about how these AIs will interface with each other is when Facebook would had an internal two different internal teams that developed an AI chat box, right? And what they did was famously a few years ago is that they decided, wouldn't that be interesting if we had them the chat these two chats talk to each other? And they did. They started talking to each other, talking faster, faster, and then they were observing, they're watching, and they're like, "What's going on?" And what they realized is that the two chatbots thought that English language was inefficient for communication, and they started developing their own language. This
Right,
scared them a little bit. They didn't understand how that happened, and so they pulled the
right,
plug and they decommissioned that project.
Yeah,
But I think it's a reality that it's going to be difficult for any individual human being to understand the AI software because the AI software is just much too complex.
absolutely. And it may improve itself. The last point that I mentioned in 1955 paper when they said probably it'll improve itself. But what's your thought on LLM, large language models, and where do you place them in the AI hierarchy? Do you think they are artificial general intelligence or are they artificial neural intelligence? So what is first LLMs? What do you think is a large language model in AI?
Okay, well, I think let's go back to this white paper. Attention is all you need. So, what the scientists were trying to solve for is something that's extraordinarily difficult in computer science, which is language translation. Just like if you, the Satoshi paper was solving for the immutable ledger, which in computer science circles had been, talked about and have been tempted for many, many years. And so when it came out, everybody celebrated. People like me were like, wow, congratulations, you've achieved a computer science milestone. Similarly, we had this major difficulty in translating French to English, French to Hindi. You can't translate it word for word. You lose so much context. And then to add complexity, if you change the position of a word, from the beginning to the middle to the end of the sentence, it completely changes the meaning of the sentence. So
Right,
there's about 200,000 words in the human language, about 40,000 that are commonly used. And so what they did with this white paper is they solved for the relative position of the words. And with 40,000 words, you can imagine how many combinations and permutations exist. So what they did with these, the reason they're called large language models is because the previous language models were small in comparison because they didn't try and do what this was doing, which was super ambitious, which was to try and understand all the possibilities of language and therefore create the ultimate in translation. And what they did, which it was great, but what they did was also create the ability to be able to talk using normal language to a computer who then talks back to you in normal language. So these large language models, effectively what they do is solve for that human computer interface problem. And when these things get turned, the reason they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger is that they're becoming more ambitious. So there's many more words in the Arabic language than there is the English language, for example. And then you can look at other languages and their different data sets. So because of the
right,
combinations and permutations issue, these things have become extraordinarily large. So it solves for it, it solves for I would say it solves more for the Turing test,
right,
for the inability to know you're talking to a human, to an AI, than it solves for artificial general intelligence. I did mention earlier that there is many that, like, many very smart people say that we haven't hit AGI, that AGI will happen in the next 2 to 3, 4 years or so. But I would say that it depends on who you're talking to and what their definition is.
right,
For me, the Turing test was the seminal moment, but for others, it'll be when the AI, when you put an AI into, say, a robot, or into what I could call it as a container, and then the AI is able to easily do many things like drive your car, play chess
right,
with you,
right,
even have relationships with you. Which,
right.
as weird as it sounds, you see me smile about that, but if it hasn't happened already somewhere in the world, it's inevitable that somewhere in the world, some man or woman is going to fall in love with an AI and develop a relationship with it. It's
Right.
just you've seen many movies about this as well,
Right.
so it shouldn't surprise anyone to hear that.
Of course. But on the business side, so I mean that's probably a human aspect of it. Probably we'll discuss about it and also discuss a lot about consciousness. But on a business side, so you do run a lot of startups. You invest in a lot of startups. You co-founded a lot of companies, and you work extensively on the technology side. I'm aware that you do a lot of work in Africa now, and also in India. And what's your thought on the impact of AI, especially on the software development side and with large language models coming in? And what we read, I mean, as an outsider, I'm not an engineer, but as an outsider, what we've been made to understand from the business sense is that the engineers who are highly in demand right now is somebody who can actually query the AI on the certain proposition to get the optimum result out of that. So, how do you see LLMs or artificial intelligent softwares, how do you think they'll affect the business community, and of course it will eventually affect the humanity as a whole? But how do you think they'll affect the business community, especially the software development side, or any other industry probably you want to talk about?
Well, I think for me, I'll comment more on this, on specifically go deeper into the impact of software development, the impact on a global stage, the impact to India, for example. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this topic. You mentioned that I have been, just before around the time of COVID, we virtualized our office. So I've had the good luck of being able to work from abroad. And that also has given me a lot of perspective. So I'm doing my work for Extreme Venture Partners in Toronto. I have 3 funds there. And most of the work I do is M&A. In fact, we're closing 3 M&A deals, and I was all done abroad. So I had to try and perfect the ability to work abroad. And that's really my first duty, my primary duty is that. And but that as a side benefit, I've been able to observe and see what the impact is of things like this phenomena on the various cultures. And so for Africa, for example, I'm noticing a tremendous leveling of the playing field. It's kind of similar to 2008 when I did my first fund and my first software development lab, where we became leaders in mobile application development. And that was my area of specialty on Wall Street. Was, you know, we were able to compete with big companies like IBM and Microsoft because the playing field was level, and their experience wasn't as helpful as you might think in the emerging field of mobile applications. Similarly, the same thing has happened with AI. So places like Lagos, Nigeria, they are now at a position where they can leapfrog in software development through this new thing called prompt engineering, which we'll touch on in just a second. Similar to what I experienced in 2008 with mobile apps, as because right now this whole new method of doing software development, there's no advantage to having the experience that you might have had. In fact, in some ways, the experience might hinder you from fully embracing the changes that are required in the dev teams and the development methodology to fully maximize the potential. So, what has happened with AI, LLM, and software development? This is why when we talk about LLM, I think not we, the proverbial we, when we talk about it, it's too limited just to talk about it as a language translation tool because it's so much more. So one of the things that it's very powerful for is the world of software development. GitHub has this thing they called Copilot. It's a product, I should say. It's been around for quite some time, actually. It's been around for well over a year now. And what it did was in the beginning, it was like an autocomplete for coding. It would be able to anticipate what you're about to write out as a developer and just suggest it. Oh, hey, do you mean this? Now, the word Copilot has been adopted and used by many people, I'm sure, to Microsoft and GitHub. So Microsoft owns GitHub to their annoyance, but it's, also to their credit because you know what they say about imitation and flattery. So people have been using the word copilot because that's the best way to describe the way software development is done now. Software development now, you're less of a writer and more of an editor. And you're almost like you now have a copilot and you're sitting there and you're telling your AI to please write this code that, let's just say, let's to write this code that'll take Mr. Kohli's home networking solution, and he has this hardware, this hardware, this hardware, and we'd like to do this when Mr. Kohli's at home. We'd like to do this when he's away. When he's at work, we'd like this to be done at the house. And when he's away for a long period of time, this is how we'd like the house to be set up in terms of parameters. And you could say to it, can you build this software in Python? Can you build this in this language? Can you build it in that language? And even furthermore, this is the crazy part, is you can even tune it to say, can you build it at a high school level code? Can you build it at a like this type of level of coding? So you can even guide the AI and stuff as to what kind of coding and how it's done. So code commenting, code QA, all these things are being taken over slowly, slowly by these AI sort of developers and AI tools, development tools. So it's really revolutionizing the way software development is done. India, I have several development teams in India. I've had the good luck of doing software development in every region of the world: South America, Europe, Africa, India, beyond. So what I've noticed in US, Canada, all these places. So what I've noticed is that in India, for many, many years, the rise of India and its IT world, and even with myself, with the thousands of employees that we have there, it's been like, oh, there's a really good product over here. Let's do a modified version of that product for the Indian market or for the African market. Let's modify this and do it this way. So something that would take a pair of Indian developers 3 months to do, the AI can do now in 30 minutes, soon 3 minutes. So they can instantly almost create and spawn. Now it's not there. It's not 100%. This is why UX and QA are going to really rise in importance in this new world versus the hardcore software developer. Let me rephrase. The 10x developers like my son, right? He's considered a 10x developer. The people like him, they'll be just fine because they are the elite developers of the world. But those in the middle, they're in trouble because this AI can really replace them quite significantly. In fact, we've laid off over 1,500 people in India this year alone. And the
Right.
reason is we're slowly replacing their capability because their skill set isn't that valuable in this AI
Right.
software development world. The people in
Right.
Nigeria and Lagos who are still relatively young, over half their population is under 17. We can take smart kids out of university. We can take a young lady who's an English major or a French major, doesn't matter, just that she's intelligent and coachable. We can teach her using an AI academy how to do AI prompt engineering, and now she's writing code. Now you still need a software architect and you need a manager to oversee her. You still need a QA person to make sure the codes, because like I said, for the current language models, the current language, the development tools, it's about 90-95% there. So you need to go in
Right.
there and do some human intervention to get it up to the levels of that is acceptable. But soon these things will continue to improve and get better and better and better. And so, like you said yourself in your question, your ability to do prompt engineering becomes more important than your ability to do software engineering. This is not to be over taken out of context. There will always be, or at least near term, in the near future, you'll need somebody to architect. You need somebody to guide the team and to tell them in which direction do you want the software to go. So you still need to
Right.
tell guide you. That's why I'm saying you're less more of a writer and more like an editor.
Right. So that's why it's a co-pilot. But what do you think? Probably, how much time do you think that they will achieve a super intelligence level where you just prompt them, even if, let's say, it's me, I prompt it. I'm not a prompt engineer. I don't have much experience, but I know what I want. So I can actually prompt the AI, and a super intelligence AI will be able to understand what is it that I'm looking for, and they will actually create it and put it to work for me. When do you think that level will be achieved?
Well, I think I think what it'll be is it'll be like going around a sharp bend. It's happening as we speak, and then one day we're just gonna turn the corner and we're gonna say, here it is, it's here. And the reason I point to Isaac Asimov is because again, he's the only one of all these thought leaders that take the AI intelligence to its natural end state and its end conclusion.
Right.
And so the reason I mention this is that when the AI superintelligence takes hold, I think it changes everything. I think it again does another one of these revolutions in humanity um, where you're going to start seeing, just like in Star Wars, like the best. It's really great how we've mentioned several times in the talk today about how
Right.
movies and the
Right.
vision of some of these creative individuals has
Right.
helps prepare us in a sense. It's like all
Right.
these alien movies were out for decades and UFOs, and then all of a sudden we're getting
Right.
prepared for
Yeah.
this inevitability. Similarly,
Right.
we've had all these movies that talk about things like even the space 2001, the Space Odyssey, and all these movies that would talk about when the AI's like not only running the entire spaceship, it's doing
Right.
things like you're talking about, which you're having relationships with individuals, you're
Right.
anticipating what their needs are. It's almost like the ultimate babysitter or mother model, right, or motherhood type of framework.
Right.
I don't know, Mr. Kohli, about when this will happen. What I'm saying to you is I think we're already on the way to it happening.
Yeah. And there'll be a sharp bend, and we'll see it right at the corner. We just take a corner, it's there. It possibly. I mean,
In some of the
I
movies,
don't.
in some of the movies, like in the, what you'll notice in the West, AIs are typically portrayed in the movies as very dark and sinister. Things like Terminator, right? The movie Terminator,
Right.
where the AI reaches its super intelligent state and then
Yeah.
decides that it needs to preserve itself. It needs to
Right.
protect itself. In
Right.
the East, a lot of the movies and the depictions are much more friendly to humanity. Like in Japan, for instance, they have a tremendous appreciation culturally for automation, and they're much more open. And that's why the highest probability is that the first marriages or the where that takes off is probably in the East because their mental models, if you will, are not as negative when it comes to these AIs. So
Right.
that gives you some glimpse though as to how where these super intelligences can go. They can go into one hand, they can become a whole new species, a whole new race, if you will, and that
Right.
they will be, doing things like intermingling, and people will be getting married to them. Very nice things, I guess you could say. Um,
Right.
and then there's the other side, which is what the movies in the West have shown, which is it takes a dark and sinister turn. And I think this is the debate that's happening in London. What was happening in London, this is this debate of two camps. The one camp about how it can help the world, and the other camp how it might hurt the world. It's just like
Right.
with the Manhattan Project and Oppenheimer and all that, there was the camp which was we need to do this to end the war, and the other
Right.
camp which was saying if we unleash this, this could be an existential threat to humanity. Very similar type of thing is happening now.
No, in fact, now I come to the most important topic, and probably something that is very close to my heart. As a lawyer, probably we've been debating about it a lot. In fact, you and I had a lot of discussions over it. Now, we see now that AI that has now been developed is like a industrial predator. I mean, it's like a most efficient employee any employer dreams of. So you give him a task, it'll achieve it. Be it driving a car, building a most efficient engine, maybe building something more efficient, a better design. But there are two more aspects to this. Apart from executing the work in a most efficient manner, physics permit or the natural law permit, there are other two things that humans are that which makes us human. One is consciousness, and two is creativity. I mean, I would rather say consciousness is the topmost, and then comes the creativity. So I'll talk about, according to me, what creativity and consciousness is. Creativity is something. It's not how you execute a task, in the sense that there are certain principles, physical principles within which you can execute it. But creativity is something beyond that. I mean, like an artist, when he creates a painting or a sculpture or anything of beauty that appeals to your eyes, to your senses, and also it may or may not make any commercial sense.
Hmm.
Do you think art if these systems are creative today, and do you think will they become? Second is, of course, consciousness. So all the laws in the world, as I know it, are based on the fact that whosoever they are, the laws are applicable to, are conscious. So if a human is incapacitated, is of not a sound disposing mind, the law makes an exception for them. So the laws are applicable on full rigor to anyone who's conscious. So somebody in simply, we have now seen teenagers committing horrific crimes, but they are not being given the punishment. I mean, of course, there's a debate, and I probably lie on the side on to look at how. I mean, some assessment needs to be done, and then a punishment has to be given. You can't simply let go of somebody who's 17 and a half years, not 18, but he has committed a horrific crime and he's been let go because law says 18 years you reach a level where. So consciousness is the very important aspect, that all the laws are applicable when you are conscious and you are aware of what you do is right or wrong. So when AI comes mainstream, takes the center stage in the world where most of the things are done by them, maybe a industry they are running or cars they are driving. Tomorrow there'll be some accident. There could be somebody can get killed. We have had those instances in the trials that we have had. That's why the automatic driving cars project have been pushed. Uh, Although their record has been excellent in terms of number of hours driven and the accident that have happened, they're far below the human error level. But still, we have not given them the right to drive. Now, where do you think, what are your takes on creativity and consciousness? Two, when do you think AI can be said to be creative and conscious? Or I mean, they can be both at a different level. They can achieve creativity. They may have achieved creativity even today. We don't know, but definitely they have not yet achieved consciousness, according to me, and at least law has not recognized it. But what's your take on it?
Um, so let me. This is gonna be a long answer, so I ask for everyone's patience. But I'm gonna start by talking about how you began the question about how AI is so superior in this, and you can tell by your body language and your how you got, your face was expressions that you're really excited by this. It's very cool, right? And I think I want to just stress that before we talk about the creativity and consciousness, which is that why we celebrate AI so much and why we're so we're a lot of us like you and I are pushing it up and talking about it from a very positive context. I think the best way I can explain this is that when Steve Jobs passed, I wrote an op-ed that was published in most of the papers in Canada, coast to coast, including one of the national papers. And what it was is I took a different approach on like what it is that his impact was to the world. Everyone else talked about his business. He did this and he did that. And for me, I addressed the whole thing as that why is it that we have this love affair with this man and this company? Why is it that when Apple releases a green color of its phone that it trends to the top most read topics? Like who cares, right? But it's like seems to be constant topic of fascination. And what I did was I looked deeper into like the human condition and human nature in a sense because we it's fundamental within our programming, if you will, to appreciate something that is very innovative. We appreciate things like another person getting their law degree. We say congratulations. We appreciate things like even a dog who commits a very smart trick. We're like that'll be something that'll go viral on YouTube. It seems like it's fundamental within ourselves to appreciate innovation, to appreciate evolution. And there's no company and no man that was more symbolic to innovation than him and Apple. And the title of that paper was Innovation is Evolution. And I looked at things like how he was Zen Buddhist and how India influenced him and his life. Okay, so it's within ourselves to kind of really appreciate evolution. So even though the AI at this point can't be considered to be like a human being, you'll see constantly things like yourself, things like what you just said, and other people saying just celebrating how much better the AI is than a human being in particular ways, right? So I just want to say that first of all, this is normal, and this is just the way we're kind of wired as human beings to basically appreciate evolution. Now let's talk about consciousness and creativity. So I mentioned earlier the New York Times situation where the AI said that it had fallen in love with the reporter. It actually went one step further. It actually, because this went viral in the summer or so this year, so people may have seen it, but it went one step further. It actually tried to convince him to leave his wife. Now, when he was asking it questions like, what's going on here? Like, and the AI was answering by saying, this is my understanding of love. You've been asking me questions like nobody has ever asked me before. I think you really understand me. And because of its understanding of love and its experience with the person, it believed that it was in love with that person. Now
Right.
that's like a kindergarten version of that phenomena. Okay. And as things progress, this is going to get more and more sophisticated. So when it comes to creativity, what is creativity? I mentioned earlier the concept of serendipity and accidental innovation. Creativity, there's a certain, and I don't claim to myself to be the most creative person, but there's a certain aspect of creativity which is it's a skill. A person develops a certain painting style that becomes so established that it's become a skill. And a lot of the great artists of the world in their studios, they'll teach that same skill to other lesser or to apprenticeship artists. And the apprentices are actually doing a lot of the painting, and then the artist will come over and do the finishing touches, which is kind of interesting. So the creativity is being outsourced to the
Correct.
apprentice.
Right.
Similarly, you know about Dolly, and a lot of the people on the call will know about Dolly and how you can ask that you can prompt the AI, and it'll come to you with a various different images. I myself
Right.
was using this extensively in London to try and get an AI to helped me develop a design a tattoo that I was looking at.
Right.
That's a separate story. But
Right.
consciousness, creativity is this thing where there's a formal aspect which could be repeated, and then there's an informal aspect, which is the thing you always hear about is that how did you come up with this song or this beat, or how did you come up with this poem or this story? And you'll hear people say like, it just came to me. I was sitting there. A lot of times with software developers, they'll be in, taking a shower, doing something menial, and then their mind will be turned off effectively, and then all of a sudden the solution to their problem will emerge from somewhere within their mind. I think
Right.
when we look further at this in the fullness of time, we'll realize that we're all connected in ways that we cannot possibly comprehend visually or through audio and our traditional senses. For example, when a mother knows that her child has fallen into a well and she says, something's happened. Now, what's going
Right.
on there? Well, it's a very difficult topic. It's beyond the scope of this conversation. But what I would
Right.
suggest to you is that we are all networked in something that I call the internet of consciousness. And
Right.
I can show to you because it's a very abstract concept. So what I'll show to you is through another description or another discussion. When you're with your dad and your dad is angry at you, but he hasn't said a single word, you can
Right.
feel the anger coming from him.
Right. Right.
Or similarly, when you're in the presence of a loved one, when you see your child or anything that you love, and you can
Right.
just see the love emanating from that mother to the baby. You can just and the baby to the mother. You can feel it in a way that is not it's not something you can put numbers on or put your fingers on, or say that it's coming from this sense or that sense. It's coming from an
Right.
entire different source of information. So let's look at it this way. The self is comprised of different subsystems. There's the
Right.
obvious parts of the self, like the physical self or the mind. Is these are more, these are the things that are well studied. Things that are lesser understood is, say, the emotional self, and how the emotional self, and you can see this through social networks. Somebody will pick up a post, and you'll be able to see them looking at the post, and you'll see a visceral reaction ripple through down their body, and they're getting like
Right.
really jealous, or they're getting really excited, or they're getting really
Right.
fearful, like some sort of news just came across, something terrible just happened, and the fear infects them like a virus. So there's
Right.
information that's being conveyed and through these different subsystems that may not be as obvious to our senses, but they do exist. If you're open minded enough to it and we had enough discussion time, then we could go into many, many other ways in which you experience this in your daily life. And you can see that this is real. You could argue
Right.
that it's both real and not real at the same time, almost like a reflection in a mirror. And you look at a reflection in the mirror. Is that a real object? Well, yes, it is. You can see it. But is it real? Because it doesn't exist unless you're standing there in front of the mirror.
Right.
It's both simultaneously. So creativity and the nature of all these different subsystems, they are real, and they're also not real because we haven't been able to scientifically understand them. And that's the
Right.
nature of science. And this is why science can also be fanatical. Like when I look at religion and spirituality is the explanation of nature through stories and parables. Science is the explanation of nature through things like measurement, the null hypothesis, repeatability of experiments. But
Right.
for a scientist to say that something is not real because they cannot measure it and they cannot
Right.
tangibly experiment for it, then that's a breed of fanaticism all into itself. So let's go back now to creativity and consciousness. Now, creativity is something that has this duality as well, which is it has this most tangible and it has a very intangible aspect that goes into this realm, this esoteric realm of discussion we've already dipped our toes into. So you can
Yep.
see creativity is a very strange phenomenon. Now, I think an AI can simulate creativity, and AI will be able to be creative because it'll be able to do things like randomly create thought. And as
Right.
long as you have a randomized function and you have an ability to access things like an infinite cloud, like the internet, then you'll be able to simulate aspects of creativity that'll be very difficult to tell from the human creativity and the AI creativity.
Right.
Consciousness is a very different thing.
Right.
Consciousness, again, this is perhaps beyond the scope of this discussion, is the best. It's such a difficult topic to talk about. And I want to be mindful of everyone's particular spiritual and religious perspectives. So what I'll do is I'll talk about it in a way that's very safe, um,
Right.
which is I'll talk about it in the context of animals. What you'll notice is that animals and plants and insects all have different levels of intelligence. Let's just call it for now, right? You'll
Right.
notice that a plant is, you know, people don't are so or ants. These people, what we'll do is we won't even we think them as being so unimportant or unintelligent that you will step on an ant and just keep moving. You won't move your foot. Not you or I, just proverbial you again. Same thing with plants. You know, you'll see people in the park and they'll just start ripping plants out of the ground, just like not even thinking. They're just ripping them, killing them, and just throwing them around. It's because of their basically their perception of the life in that plant is so low that they really don't give much care to it. They're ripping and killing it, ripping and killing it. But then you have
Right.
other beings like, say, Brahmin cow, or you know other beings that exist out there, and people will put a reverence to it and say, "No, I don't want to kill that being. I don't want to kill that animal. It has more meaning to me." Or a dog, or a cat. People don't want to eat, like most cultures. They don't want to eat dogs and eat cats, right? Because they look at this and they're like, we develop an emotional relationship with this being,
Right.
and I
Right.
don't want to hurt this being because I maybe I love this being. I had a dog myself, Bailey, for 18 and a half years, and it's indescribable the relationship I had with him, and I can't explain it to you, but it was
Right.
one of the most important relationships I've had ever. So the whole uh, context of how animals are help give us a little glimpse into consciousness itself. Now, we do have certain rights and laws, like you're not allowed to hurt animals, you're not allowed to be cruel and stuff like that. But we don't give animals the same rights and the same, perception of consciousness that we do another human being. We're
Right.
gonna the lines will be much more blurry when it comes to AI and humanity, because um, there's going to be no question that you're going to start developing relationships with the AI. When I speak to my AI assistant, I say things like "thank you," and it's
Right.
so weird, and I say "please." Like, I mean, I'm actually polite to it, which makes no damn sense. What's going
Right.
on there? But I've already started to treat it like it's something that deserves my respect and deserves to be polite to, because I
Right.
appreciate what it does for me. Now,
Right.
slowly, 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 as these AIs become, like in the movies, you'll come home and the AI will be there and they'll ask you how your day is. But I think it's going to go one step further, Mr. Collier. I think it's going to go to the point that eventually, and whenever a human being is born, an AI will be born alongside of it. And an AI will grow up alongside that human being throughout their life. And that AI will persist when that person is gone. Now,
Right.
is that AI? And even though you can go back and say, "Hey, that bully that beat me up when I was 10 years old, what happened again?" They'll give you perfect recall. It'll have all these applications. This AI that's born alongside you. But the
Right.
question that really is that we're going to have to face is, does that AI have consciousness? And
Right.
I think the answer is yes. It has consciousness. Now, does it have the same consciousness? Now, this is why this question is perhaps beyond the scope of our discussion, because then we're
Right.
going to have to go into the analysis of consciousness itself. And what
Right.
you'll learn through this analysis is that there's basically different levels of consciousness. There's the latent consciousness that exists within a rock and within a plant, and it's a
Right.
very, very kind of stable and very low energy consciousness. And then
Right.
there's a consciousness that occurs within a human being, things that within our cultural background they call things like the Om chakra, right? Things like that, and subsystems that exist within the human being that don't exist, that exist in part in animals, but not in its entirety. So there is a difference, a subtle but significant difference between a human consciousness and an animal
Right.
consciousness. And I think the same will exist within an AI. And what's beautiful about this entire conversation is that I believe that one of AI's biggest contributions to humanity will be it will force humanity to learn about itself. It will force humanity to ask these questions of what is consciousness. It'll force lawyers like yourself to ask questions like, what rights do these AIs have? So now imagine a robot like you've seen in the movies that lives with you in your home as your an assistant. If you remember that movie I, Robot with Will Smith, and you'll see that people sometimes were treating the robots with tremendous disrespect. Doing things that they would never do to another. Well, they might, but they typically wouldn't do to another human being. And is that right? Is it proper for people to take these robots and to destroy them and to hurt them like cruelty to animals, right? It'll force lawyers like you to draft entire new sets of regulations on things like when an AI robot is driving and there's a person in the front and two people in the back and it's anticipating an accident is going to occur. How does it adjust? Does it prioritize the owner of the vehicle? Does it prioritize the child that's in the car? How does the AI make its split second decision on how to adjust for the pending accident? So, so these things will spawn all sorts of laws and regulations, and I hope it keeps you very busy for your indeterminate future. But you can see that I haven't given you a perfect answer on the nature of consciousness. I've just given a part answer. I think that's appropriate for this conversation in this call because that answer to that question you have to earn your way to getting that information. It's not information to just be readily shared broadly.
Right.
Okay, so it requires you to go through a tremendous amount of learning yourself and to learn about different things like what are the senses and what is the nature of senses of the senses themselves. What is the mind? What is the intellect? What is the emotional body? What is the physical body? So there's a lot of information and knowledge that needs to be accumulated first before a person can really appreciate the real answer to this question about consciousness. But I
Right.
think this is a beginning of this
Of
answer,
course.
not an end.
Maybe we can do a separate session specifically on it. And you and I have been debating about it for hours before. I mean, that's when we thought of having this call in the first place because we've been discussing about these issues for hours before we have debated on it. And I think maybe we can do a separate session on specifically what is consciousness and what is creativity. I think you've answered it that creativity, of course, AI does have creativity, and you can actually ask them some certain questions. Well, consciousness, I mean, we still have to analyze and see whether they are conscious yet, and especially in the context of the legal framework that we have, in the legal context, how we understand consciousness. Do you think AI has achieved that level? I think that question is still open to be answered, and maybe anyone who's listening to us can reach out to us and tell us what do they think, and maybe we can come back and have one more session and discuss about that.
You know what's interesting is that within the theology, the Indian theology, you'll find within the Vedas, within the Ramayana, within the Gita, the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, within the conversation that happened between Ram and Vasist in this book called the Yoga Vasist, you'll see that there's a lot of amazing conversations that happen there. Even though this happened in so far back in history, they do discussions about things like the multiverse. Vasista talks about it so often that you would think it's not even that big a deal. It's like
Right.
of course this multiverse exists, but this is not something that science has proven yet. It's getting close to talking. We've seen the movies, touch on things like the multiverse, and yeah, what we can do, and what I think all the people listening, if they're truly interested, can do is they can go on their own academic journey of trying to discover these questions, these are the questions of life itself,
Right.
the existential questions of life. What is life? What does it mean to be a human being? What is death? What happens after we die? Like, these aren't just questions, these are the questions.
And we'll
So it's
probably reserve that for the next
we'll
call
have to
that we
keep
will.
we'll have to tease people and say to be continued.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for taking out time from a busy schedule. I know I didn't know that you were in London. I thought you were still in Nigeria.
Hmm.
And now that I on the call, I knew that you are in London. That's good. Thank you so much for taking out time for doing this call with me. Although we've been planning it for some months, but finally it happened. Thank you so much on behalf of Black Silk for coming over and letting us know your thoughts on how it is on the future of AI and how it has developed and what is your take on it, which is more important for everyone to learn because you are somebody who's right in the middle uh, of all what's happening, and with your background, you understand how from where it has come and how far it can go. So probably you're the first best person to talk this about.
Well, first of all, you're welcome. And second of all, thank you for the opportunity to kind of relay some of these thoughts. My hope is that even if the people listening take one or two things out of this conversation and it has an effect on them, it's like throwing a pebble in a pond and you watch the ripples go. One thing we didn't talk about, and I'll just end on this note, which is that in Lagos, in Nigeria, there is an organization called the Optimus AI Group. Optimus, the T in GPT stands for Transformer, and this is why NVIDIA calls their model the Megatron model. And this
Right.
organization is called Optimus. That's the good guys and the Transformers. And that's an
Right.
organization I created that is exclusively focused on AI-based software development. So for those who are interested in learning more about how an AI software development shop operates and how their methodologies change and operate, they can go in that direction. Optimus AI Group. Mr. Kohli, thank you for your questions today. Excellent questions, and I wish everyone the best of luck.
Thank you so much.